Okay, this is Patrick again, CEO at EmpowerID. So this demo is a second part to our extension of the Azure Access Package functionality. So in the first demo, we saw how we could add a risk analysis for the access being requested. In this example, we're going to see how we can extend the reach of what types of access could be provisioned into downstream systems if a user requests an access package and if it's approved. So for our example, we have three access packages available as this user. And one of these access packages is called Basic Employee Access. And the idea behind this one is that it would grant the user everything they need as a standard employee to access the systems on day one. So that would be user accounts, home folders, mailboxes, some standard group membership, a basic birthright. Now, if we look in here, we see that it's actually granting two resources, and we could change the name on these. This EmpowerID ELM demo application, so this is an Azure application, and it's granting two application roles. The provisioning bundle for standard employees, that's the main one we're concerned about here. And then another one, which is the access to EmpowerID's IT shopping cart system, task management, and identity self-service, which would allow a user to manage their identity, their attributes in Azure, other systems, their out of office, and some other functionality. But the main one we're concerned about is this Azure application role called provisioning bundle for standard employee. Now, of course, we can request this through the system for first day. It can go for approval within Azure as needed. And once it's fulfilled, it's actually going to, actually, this request is going to go to EmpowerID for fulfillment because it actually grants an app role that we have tied into EmpowerID, mapping it into, in EmpowerID, what we call a management role. A management role grants functional access or a bundle of access. Now, the bot itself, we have, it's calling an EmpowerID workflow. I'll show you a quick diagram. Okay, so here's a recap of what just happened. We requested an identity governance in Azure. We've wired that up for the request event to fire off to a logic app in Azure. The logic app forwards the call over and makes a REST API call to an EmpowerID workflow. That EmpowerID workflow can do risk analysis, which is what we did in the previous demonstration. And it can also do some things in EmpowerID, like if it goes for approval or depending upon what you're requesting, it'll figure out if that maps to anything in EmpowerID. So in this case, we requested two Azure application roles, and EmpowerID figured out that you're actually requesting those app roles would grant you management roles in EmpowerID. And those management roles, if approved, would grant you all types of provisioned access into many downstream systems, again, extending the reach of Azure. So let's go take a look at what happened next. So if we go and take a look at the workflow itself, this is EmpowerID Workflow Studio, where you can design workflows, Azure functions, web jobs, microservices, user interfaces, REST APIs, and you can design bot flows using the Microsoft Bot Framework. So what we did, just to make it more interactive, is we dragged in a couple shapes. So we tell the user that their request went for a risk analysis or approval. Here's where we process the inbound access request package to see if any of the resource roles in the package map to something in EmpowerID. We do the risk analysis, and then we let them know that, hey, their request is being processed. And then we wait a little bit to see if it gets auto-approved, because a lot of things can be set to just auto-approve. And if not, it'll send, and either way, it sends a link that says, hey, it's auto-approved, or it sends a link that says, check the status to see what's going on. So if we look at the bot has indeed told us that this is our unique request number, and what we requested, basic internal employee access, went for risk analysis, and then it waited. Now it's showing us the hero card where we can go check the status. You could have this auto-approved if you want to skip this step and have it all handled in Azure. I'm going to do a biometric authentication here real quick. Sorry about that. And I gotta give it my face. There we go. usernameless and passwordless, of course. Okay, so login as Patrick's persona. And now we can see the status of our request if we were tracking it here. So Patrick requested it for Patrick. Could have been requested for someone else or by someone else. We can see it's going for owner approval. Of course, you could skip that. Here's our provisioning bundle, which would go for owner approval to these owners who are the owners of that. Of course, I'm an owner, but you could remove me if you want to by policy. Once that's approved, it would then grant me the access that management role in EmpowerID would grant. So if we go and look at that management role, here's the provisioning bundle for standard employees. And we see it's going to grant me, as far as provisioning policies, it would provision me an Azure Active Directory account in this tenant, an AD LDS account, an account on a local Windows server, an Active Directory home folder, an Active Directory account, an SAP ABAP account in S4HANA, and a HANA account in SAP HANA, the database. So this is just an example. You could attach any provisioning policy to any type of system, ServiceNow, Salesforce, RackF, whatever you want. And anyone getting this management role, again, by requesting that Azure app role, would be provisioned all of this access automatically. And of course, if they were unassigned that role in Azure, it would remove or deprovision or start the deprovisioning process for this. Now, in addition to that provisioned access, it's also granting some group memberships, just as an example. So we say our birthright access, we're going to grant them the welcome role for SAP ABAP. We're going to grant them this other basic data display role. We're going to grant them membership in an Active Directory group, actually 2 Active Directory groups. But again, this could be access to anything: SharePoint group memberships, shared folder access, box access, pretty much anything you'd want. If we have the reach to grant that access, then it would be automatically granted and revoked based upon having this role. So the question would be, well, I requested an Azure access package, which was 2 Azure app roles. How did that tie into granting EmpowerID access? So it's a pretty easy model. We just did this as a little spike. If you go into app registrations, all we did was, and you could do this from EmpowerID, we can actually create Azure apps from EmpowerID wizard workflows. That's something we support as well. But I just created it in here quick and dirty. So I created this demonstration Azure app, and all I did was I went and created a bunch of Azure app roles. So these Azure app roles are represent something in EmpowerID. They could be EmpowerID business roles. They could be EmpowerID management roles. They could be even group memberships in any system EmpowerID can connect with. We would figure that out. And what the link that ties it together is when I created the app roles, I gave the value as the unique identifier of the object in EmpowerID. So this is the provisioning bundle for standard employees, so it's an app role, but the unique value actually matches up to the GUID of the object in EmpowerID. So that way, when EmpowerID receives the request, we can loop through the resource roles or the things being requested, and we can see if any of them match up to something that's in EmpowerID, and we transform that request and say, okay, what you're really requesting as far as things in EmpowerID side were this management role and this management role. And then you can do risk analysis, and of course, if it's approved, any downstream provisioning of that access. So that's just a quick review. I hope that this made sense. If not, I'm happy to answer questions on a live demonstration or a live call. Thanks, everybody.